Hi. All right. So this is a little bit of an experiment here. Um, but I just wanted to go live. I usually go in the mornings, and I think some of my timing is going to change now. But just kind of like a kind of reveal here is that for the last 3 months, I've been going live doing these readings. Some of the purpose of it was to get more comfortable on camera, which I think is, partially achieved. But ultimately, I wanted to show up regardless of how overextended I was. And I was very overextended. So I had commitments that had me pretty much working like really like kind of waking up very early, going to bed really late, and working all the way through. Really to mostly to work, Parinama method, other commitments that I have related to investments and whatnot. So, and I have since put myself in a position where I can actually start down, like getting really like significantly more regulated. And so that's really what Parinama method is ultimately about, is about managing nervous system overload. So I was interested in watching what happened when I maxed mine out, which I did, which I won't go into great detail on here, but it certainly, every hub was activated. But anyway, so I wanted to just take a little time and do a little bit of reading, just to continue to make some progress here. Um, yeah, so I actually had done a reading for that started here, and I think the last one was probably pretty chaotic. I have to like rewatch that. But so for where we're gonna start tonight is birth, welcomed and wanted. And one of the things that as I've been rereading this is that I'm realizing that for me, the process of writing this book, it gave me the opportunity to do these really significant deep dives into some of these topics that are really, really pretty essential to the Parinama practice. And what I mean by essential is it really, it's ultimately about being able to have a relationship with yourself. It's about like assuming positive intent in your actions, ultimately. I mean, if I were to summarize it. And so what that means is that we see ourselves not through like a critical narrative, but we see ourselves more as a natural extension or a natural outcome of circumstances that shaped us, combined with, just sort of our natural, natural, I guess, essence being of who we are. And so with Parinama method, what we're doing is we're actually doing a dive into each of these facets of ourselves in a way that, so my hope with this is unlike, like conventional methodologies that kind of enter in through where the cracks are the largest, which is where there's a lot of pain, that this is actually kind of, the idea of being able to go through these facets of ourselves and, just without necessarily selecting them based off of their like emotional voltage, and building up this bank of basically acceptance and compassion about the different facets of who we are. And so in the first hub, and this is something that now I am dedicated to building full time. So as you see me begin to hopefully restore my own, restore my own nervous system, is the developing of a way for people to practice this. And in some ways I look at this like, for some folks to really benefit from how I was able to have a similar process that I did to go kind of into a deeper level of contemplation for these topics, because now that I read the book and now that I even talk to people who are reading the book, it's realizing that for me and for like, so, or actually I'd say for a reader, there's definitely an evocative passage to read, but me writing it was like, I don't know, an extraordinary amount of time spent researching and working on it. So, and really my own process of exploration in it, which it, very often became, um, you know, like a real process of transformation. So, anyhow, I am going to dip in here. And so, actually, okay, the ancestry origin stories and owning them, which is the passage that comes before this one, is kind of a lead in. And so first hub is about a notion of like really how secure we feel it physically in the world. And this takes on all sorts of like all sorts of I guess you could say manifestations, and it can be money, um, and just anxiety around things like having one's needs met. Money is a really common way for this to be expressed, because it is like money can kind is like abstract at its core, so it's sort of like how that can show up and exist is very dynamic as a result of that. But things like health, home, things like what topics that have been investigated here. But at its core, this sense of physical security it's about this establishment of landing in a physical body. So whatever like essence it is that comes alive, whatever the associated belief system, it's about the experience in a physical body, and the relative insecurity of that, the fact that there are kind of like rules that of like about like the requirement of what it takes to keep it alive. So it's temperatures, it's food, it's hydration, it's even like the sensitivity of like exposure to elements. It's kind of, and even exposure to disease and the ability to fight off disease like microbes and and so parasites that we're pretty, the physical body is pretty sensitive ultimately. Okay, so like what I'm getting at is that within the first hub, the experience of birth is the establishment of like the sense of whether the physical world is to what extent we can live in it with a sense of relative safety in the physical world. And this is is a really kind of profound conversation, because I remember my editor, the intro to this chapter is Albert Einstein contemplating that like a central question of life is contemplating whether the universe is friendly or not. And I remember my editor just like unblinkingly was like, well, it's not. And I was like, yeah, no, this is actually kind of part of the thing we're trying to reconcile here, is this kind of idea of like whether it is or not. And so to that point, it's really how safe you can feel within yourself in an environment that is uncertain, and in an environment that is interconnected with everything around it. So it's not necessarily that you're creating some kind of dissociated or delusional state that you're just like ultimately safe. It's more just how you can rest within knowing that there is like you're kind of like and trusting your reflexes, feeling that your stability is actually like the locus of control with that is internalized, so that it is a feeling of being physically grounded, that is a feeling of physical boundary, it is a feeling of consistency. So what we get into later in the fourth hub is about how a lot of that comes from like breath, the idea that there are these, whether we feel like we've been abandoned, whether we feel like, whether we feel like the world is an insecure place, that there is a ground that has always been there, always catches us, and that there's a breath that for every single moment of our life, we have been at some point in that cycle, and this kind of profound depth of love, that there's a heart that beats within us that has never stopped, and breath that continues to to work in concert with the heart. So it's like the breath and the heart working in concert to create this presence that has maintained our life for every second that we are aware of, or that we've experienced in this, in this life. So, with that said, yeah, I mean, this would actually be a good time to do a little bit of a somatic practice, but it's kind of late right here, and I want to make sure that I get some reading done. And also, before I jump in, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for investing in any sense, in any way, in this practice, in yourself as it relates to it. And yeah, and how grateful I am for that. And also for all of the comments, all of the likes, anything that you send my way that interacts with this. It means the world to me. I'm committed to showing up I'm going to be honest, I'm committed to showing up regardless, but it really, really means a lot to me when I get any form of engagement with this. It does really makes my day. Yeah, it's pretty easy to please me right now. It's pretty much like, yeah, it's pretty easy to make me happy right now. Or is it easy? I don't know, but it's like it's predictable how you can do it. So okay, before I dip into the reading with this, I want to just make a point that so the point of physical security is that it exists within, and this actually surprised me in the writing, is in terms of what arose in the process of this exploration of developing this, was that our sense of physical security has like these two very like predominant, like almost, yeah, I almost call them bookends, but it's kind of like doesn't feel completely right. But it's our birth, which informs our like basically informs like the, at least the it informs the sense of physical security. It's like the first points of data that we're operating off of, or information that we're operating off of for our life. And then the second is, is the other side, which is death, which is, fear is just, ultimately is really about death. It's about obliteration. And so any single, I had a meditation teacher who had taught me this many years ago, 15 years ago, that any fear that we have, if we trace it back, is ultimately a fear of death. So, and so we do these exercises where we'd walk back anything that I had anxiety about, and we'd find that it was like ultimately about dying. And so for physical security, and the sense in this first hub of cultivating it is, first of all, bringing consciousness to this highly nuanced aspect of what it means to be secure in a physical body, because it's a lie to say that we are. That's not completely, that can't be true. We are all, but it's to be able to exist in your physical presence with a state of like presence. Like it's a state of just being able to bring yourself into into your existence, like bring yourself into your existence. And the other part is, we'll kind of read through it when we talk about death, is our relationship with death. And this is probably a little too deep for this for this format, but part of writing this book involved me accepting a death of a form of my identity, which I was very attached to. As a professional, and even in like this, in like certain spaces in the world that I existed in, like letting those go and allowing for the space to be created to, kind of like become whatever it was that, or whatever this is that I've become and continue to become. But yeah. I mean, look, these are as like profound as topics as they come, I guess, right? So anyhow, right, so I'm gonna read a little bit now. So birth, welcomed and wanted. So Dante Alighieri wrote in La Vita Nuova, in that part of the book of my memory before which little can be read, there is a rubric saying, here beginneth the new life. For better and sometimes for worse, we learn about our formative events because they've been installed like programming in our bodies. When we were born, did we feel wanted? Were we conceived in love? Were we embraced, attended to, and cooed over? Were we watched with wonder and adoration, or were we treated as an obligation and duty? What was the transition like, and how did we first experience the world outside the womb? Was the room quiet and warm with soft light, or was there the beeping machinery and cold air of a delivery room? Imagine waking up from deep, satisfying sleep to the described conditions of your birth. How would you expect the rest of your day to go? There's so much that can be said about this, by the way. There's so much that can be said about this, but I will carry on. So for some people, this exploration is pleasant and fun, but for others, it's upsetting. Feeling wanted, for example, creates interruption. Feeling unwanted, for example, creates interruption that can require adopted children to reconcile their birth mother having surrendered them, regardless of their loving adoptive home. This came up a lot in interviews, by the way. A lot. Adoption. This is a feeling that is deeper than rational thought and deserves gentle patience when it's explored. Examining it can help us to understand some important experiences that shaped us before our memory could record them. The maternal physical role runs deep. The connection to our biological origin and the fused sense of identity during gestation is a connection that reaches into our bodies and minds. The new fathers I interviewed spoke of knowing the relationship was biological, but it was still hard for them to have the child prefer their wives or partners for the first year or so. Even in the same-sex couple interviews, there was a distinction that was less about gender and more about a primal sense of maternal and paternal roles. A gay father told me of his children's matter-of-fact explanation that he was the dad and his partner was the mom, which he had struggled with because housework and nurture were shared equally and the couple had made conscious efforts to avoid gender labeling. Dad does the cooking, he said. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Neither do I. It's interesting as I'm reading this, and it's odd that I use the term primal because I actually think that children are socialized and have ideas of things. So I don't think that's primal. I think that's socialized ideas. Yeah. But anyway, knowing your birth story, however, is not essential for restoring ground and stability in this hub. It's nice to know, but if it exposes you to hurt you don't want to endure, don't pursue this information. Adopted children, or those of us who cannot be in touch with family, say through estrangement or death, can simply explore the birthing practices common at the time and even meditate on it if that feels right. The modern delivery and labor room in a hospital is a recent development in human history. The past 50 years have seen a great deal of progress in making birth a gentler transition, but many of us who were born under bright lights and clinical surroundings and then got slapped in the bum and poked and prodded in our first moments of life, all of these things were shocks to our soft and vulnerable body. And keep in mind that the remnants of old methods remain stored in our cultural consciousness and ancestry. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I had a hard time with in this, and so, even though it's like I kind of something I like believe to my core, more like no to my core. Belief is actually something I really struggled initially with the idea of like things that are pre-memory impacting life. And specifically even the idea, and I think it's still pretty common, that like kids won't remember things before a certain period of time. And I recently, for my birthday I was given pickled cotton candy, and I ate some of it, and it like it brought this like wave of a sensation of being somewhere. It was just sensory. It's like very like pleasant. Like I liked it, but I couldn't place it. And it was just it was like traveling in the past without like a narrative. And so it was sensation. And then over time I realized it tasted like a scratch and sniff pickle sticker. Like this. And that I could remember being older and finding that sticker, but actually when I first had it, like the initial time of having it in a sticker album was, probably 5 or 6 years old. So it's like a little deeper in there. And so that was an interesting kind of notion of the fact of how much like sensory information and kind of like reflexive feeling is stored in there. But just for me, one of the things was just realizing it's like, well, when our conscious memory comes on board, or even consciousness comes on board, there really is like a precedent that was already set. Like there was already a life being lived, and then just on top of that, we start remembering things, so that that it really became, with that being said, it really became to me more increasingly clear that there really is a whole life and a memory, and like an increasingly important part of like the core sense of who we are. I mean, look, it's the whole book, but I had a hard time with it initially, even though I kind of could, I had a sense and like a deep knowing of its truth, but I had a hard time cognitively grasping it, because I think I'd had a lot of beliefs myself, kind of maybe like hoping or believing children wouldn't be able to remember. And some of it might just be that, it's like the child's not going to be able to remember things you did, but that it's the way it's going to be coded into them is through the experience of it. So yeah, it's a memory without narrative, I guess. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a memory without narrative, because when you think about it, it's like things that are evocative, right? It's like we take in art to like evoke, and so this is just like the evoke, like what we're evoking without the narrative, without the art, without whatever. It's just like what's in us that, like, if anything, we're coaxing out through creative expression. So anyhow, so here we go into death. The last section of the, basically like the learning, the hub, so the basics and the themes. This one's short, but I think it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Okay, death. As soon as we arrive in our body, we want it to survive, but even our most valiant and perfect efforts will end in death. We fear death instinctively. Remember, our reflexes are tuned for survival, yet we tend to believe it's our conscious efforts that keep us safe. But everything that keeps us alive, from our heartbeat to our fight, freeze, or flight reflexes, operates from behind the locked door of the unconscious, like a guardian angel yanking you out of harm's way before the conscious mind has a chance to form a plan. This profound suite of protections is deep within the roots of the first hub. The ancient Bartok Vodal Is it I called it the wrong thing. The Bardo Total. Oh my god, I've been calling it the wrong thing. I'm reading my own book or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah. So the Tibetan Book of the Dead states, soon we will soon let's get to this. Maybe I'm having some subconscious reaction to this. Oh my god. Okay. Soon we all will die. Our hopes and fears will be irrelevant. Consider facing. I just have to laugh. It's really funny. It's really for a number of reasons. So consider facing the root of all fear. Everything we're intellectually scared of relates to the fear of death. You're alive now, so why not make the most of it? Yeah, I didn't read that with the proper drama. It's like, let me reread that. Consider facing the root of all fear. Everything we're intellectually scared of relates to the fear of death. You're alive now, so why not make the most of it? Yeah, it's better. It's a little more punchier. Okay, death presents a paradox. To live fully and courageously, we must accept death as inevitable. In Himalayan ashrams, there's a Bhutanese saying spoken repeatedly by practitioners to constantly remind them of death. And it is to be truly happy. To be a truly happy person, you must contemplate death 5 times a day. The notion of death has a psychological hold on us, but once we can accept some manner of its inevitability, we become more free. Acceptance of the eventual death of ourselves and others can spark despair and anxiety, or can invigorate and heighten the awareness of being alive right now. The courage, activation, and urgency to live with bravery and depth is happening now, as we realize that life is a limited time engagement. By accepting death, we can fully live. When we expand the aperture and see the paradox of our lives as both miraculously improbable and relatively insignificant, we can set ourselves free to do and be with complete integrity. Oh yeah, that's good. That's really good. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty joyful, unless you can see I'm laughing about it. Yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, look, one of the things about, it's like the quote that's later in here, the Emo Phillips quote, which is, I used to think my brain was the most marvelous organ, and I realized he was telling me that. A lot of the fear of death as a sort of like cognitive device, like it's kind of, it's like it's not, it doesn't really like serve living fully, but but the intent of it is, I think like as far as reflexes are concerned, and even concern of like doing things that have a longer term outlook for our survival, which is like certainly relevant in these kind of constructs of like economies and things, and saving money and having retirements and things like that. It's like planning ahead has like a role that I think, as far as survival is concerned, is like a newer, probably, like a newer like notion of what that is. So that's something to work with and be conscious of. But yeah, it's like soon our hopes and fears will be irrelevant. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this and being along for this ride. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Some of these right now, as I'm kind of transitioning out of sort of peak nervous system overload, and this is a little bit, coming back into being, it's like 4 days in. It's just watching it, and it's interesting for me. I don't know if it is for anyone else, but thank you so much. And again, please like, comment, anything that you have in terms of feedback is welcome, good, bad, ugly, any other designation. But I'm really looking forward to continuing this with you. And again, thank you. And wherever you are, I hope it's going really well. All right, bye.